Welcome back, Randy Bueller, joined by Eric Froelich. I think between the two of us, we have proven now that Merfolk was at least not a terrible choice, right?
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
I hope that people got to check out my match. I think it's actually really interesting. Sorry, your match was kind of unwatchable. But I actually played the matchup a lot against Bob's deck with David Williams, who played the first match, where I also played a lot with Pakula's deck. And
Okay.
the matchup, like I was saying, is really close and really fun. Like, it's something I actually really enjoyed. I kept wanting to play more just because I actually found it to be entertaining.
Oh, wow.
It's really interesting. A lot of decisions are real close. I actually thought that Bob was a slight favorite. Bob thought I was a decent favorite. So, that just shows that how much, there is to the match, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't think I was any better than a coin flip against Luis there, but his draws were terrible from what I could tell. He never did much of anything.
Yeah, I had both streams open at the same time so that I was listening to Rich and Chris and
Okay.
also watching Luis's hands. And
Okay.
oh boy, were they bad. Like, turn two would happen, and he would check his library, and I'm looking at his hand, and I'm like, yep, this game's over. He cannot win. There's like almost no sequence of draws that will get him out of this. And it's like turn two, which is pretty incredible. I mean, his deck is obviously very powerful, but his draws were real bad.
Yeah, no, I've been super impressed by his deck. And my draws weren't spectacular. I mean, they were solid. They were probably above average, but not at the top end.
No.
All right, sounds like we're getting our players ready. The match we're about to watch is going to be between Rich Shay and Tom Martell. Rich is 1-0, Tom 0-1.
That's what full matches.
Yeah, no, the chat is asking me Trigon-wise if I was trying to play around removal and afraid of a 2-for-1. I certainly was. When I attacked with the Silvergill Adept, I honestly expected it to die. Like, I expected him to gush, picking both of his islands up, so suddenly it wouldn't have island walk, and then he could potentially kill it with the Trigon. That would have been a trade though, and he was tapped out, so he wouldn't have been able to just eat it without losing the Trigon. But it was fear of those sorts of plays, which is why I tried to fight the Trigon in the first place. I mean, I spent a force because I didn't want to set it up where he had these like blast your lord, block your 2/1 sorts of lines. He had the force back, but he didn't have anything else. So.
Right, of course, the deck has so many different ways to kill your lords, which then makes Trigon just click on the board and take over.
No, I mean, I figured it was worth fighting, but he fought back. Okay, fair enough. We canceled out force on a card for force on a card. I did Gush versus Wastelands is always tricky too. Like, I never know, like, in the first game, I let him gush before I even used my Wastelands. Like, I wasn't going to Wasteland and have him gush his response. So it was like when he gushed and picked up both his islands, I was just happy that it meant I could Wasteland effectively the next turn and the turn after that. I had 2 Wastelands, but he was certainly careful with the fetch lands to make sure I never got a chance. I never got a chance to waste one that he couldn't gush out from under it.
Yeah, that's always an interesting dynamic in all the matchups because it obviously sets you back pretty bad on tempo if you don't have fast bond.
Right.
It's no plow under, but as far as vintage is concerned, for spending no mana, forcing them to bounce 2 lands to their hand is a real thing. So if you're sending them back 2 mana, assuming they don't have fast bond, that does something because obviously they prefer to gush on their turn when they have 2 mana floating, and so it's costing them land drops, but not necessarily much momentum because, as you can see, the deck can do a lot of crazy things. It turned out Luis's big finish when he started gushing was casting repeals on things that could be easily recast.
Yeah.
So no big finish there as he just had to cycle repeal to try to find action. But, of course, if he did hit action instead, he's actually in good shape.
What did you think about my decision to misstep the Vampire Tutor?
I think that's
I thought there was a... Sorry?
I think that's generally right.
Yeah, I thought there was a decent chance he'd be going for fast bond, and it's obviously more efficient if I can misstep a fast bond. It just felt risky, though. Like, he's more likely to fight over the fast bond, and what if he already has it and he's vampiric for something else? So.
Yeah, that happened a lot in actually the matchup that I played with, because obviously Bob's deck being Oath is going to have a bunch of tutors.
Yeah.
A lot of times the tutors are going to go for Oaths, which of course means you have to misstep because I don't have a lot of ways to deal with Oath itself.
Yeah, definitely.
But there are a lot of times where you are pretty sure that the tutors are going to go after Ancestral or something. So you kind of just have to make a judgment call, and I found that it's usually right to just be misstepping the tutors. I mean, there's a reason these tutors are in the deck. They are extremely powerful. And so if he happens to get the fast bond, you tons of value, but even then it's not the end of the world. Like, fact that you lost that value is not a huge deal. And the times where it goes wrong, it can go real wrong. So I would cast Misstep.
So come on, someone else has joined Rich Shay's game. So we'll remake the game and try to get Tom Martell actually into it instead of whatever random is.
Kazag. Yes, Tom Martell's screen name is Kazag or whatever. Thanks for joining the game, Kazag.
Yeah, taxing us all 5 minutes of our lives. So you just you'll misstep a mystical even if you think it's going for an ancestral in general.
It's mystical is different. Mystical is definitely different.
Okay.
Because cards like Time Walk are not generally things you want to be using counters on, and there aren't really that many great cards to be mysticaling for. Like, it really depends on the matchup. Like, again, against Oath, sometimes you think they're going for Ancestral, but a lot of times they're just going for, like, Demonic Tutor, and then they go get Oath, and then you die. So it's a fine line, and it's the same thing in every matchup. The individual cards that you're worried about are different, but there's so many good targets that, like, countering the Mystical is not really as important against Merfolk, again, when you're playing against a deck like Luis's, because the good cards are going to get are generally going to be like Ancestral or Bolt or something like that, which is not a big deal. Which you can just misstep that, of course. The chat's asking, any thoughts on potential cards could be restricted in Vintage? There's so many reasonable options, and yet I wouldn't do any of them. I actually think Mental Misstep is a real interesting card. Of course, it changes the way that decks are built and what you can do, and it's probably overpowered. And so if they did decide to restrict it, it wouldn't shock me. Of course, it's banned in Legacy and everything.
Yeah, no, I actually like the way between Mental Misstep and Brainstorm, it just gives Legacy and Vintage this totally different flavor from each other, right? Legacy becomes the Brainstorm format, and Vintage becomes sort of the Mental Misstep format. I like the way that lines up.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I do think the card is overpowered.
Mental Misstep?
Yes.
I mean, it's really good, but it also, like, so's Force of Will, right? Except it keeps things in check. Like, its net impact on the format is probably positive. Otherwise, people would just constantly do ridiculous things.
Is that true?
I mean, Misstep, it used to be you were just mystical for Ancestral, and whoever mystical for Ancestral first would just win.
That is true. That's a good point. It keeps the best card in Vintage, most likely, Ancestral Recall, in check quite a bit.
Yeah.
And the card is completely absurd. The fact that you play Mystical Tutor, Merchant Scroll, cards like that, where your target 9 times out of 10, not actually, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That is your favorite target is going to be Ancestral. The fact that you can keep that in check is big. It's tough.
The fact that it makes Key a little riskier is, I think, useful. I think that, I don't know, I think that the format is healthier because it exists, even though it's, I mean, by whatever definition of powerful you wanted to come up with, both Misstep and Force of Will would be overpowered. I think the game's up if you want to. Yeah, I see that you're watching. Great.
I have it open. Let me just turn off the volumes on my Martell if I can. Because that can get annoying. All right, let's do this thing.
All right, the Atog Lord, Rich Shay, is running the Control Slaver list that he's been piloting forever. Tom Martell, meanwhile, has another sort of Fastbond Gush list, but unlike Luis, who's running Pyromancers and Snapcasters, Tom is completely creatureless. Right. Do you have a read on how this matchup's supposed to play out?
I have none. Like, of all, I didn't even know that Rich Shay or anyone had been piloting a deck like this. I believe you told me, or someone else told me last week, that this deck has been around for a decade, where I thought this deck had been around for months. Like, I thought this was a Maiden deck. I like, my grasp on the Vintage scene, obviously I don't get to play very many Vintage tournaments. I love the format. I really enjoy it. I feel like I have, a decent sense on how things are going now, but I don't really know the history, which is something I've been learning. I've been reading a lot about, and it's very interesting to see how these decks have progressed over a decade too. And Tom's deck, I don't even know that much about it. I know he has Mystic Remoras, which is not a card that anyone else is playing.
It's nice against blue decks. Mystic Remora is from Ice Age. Like, Andrew Cuneo played that card against me back in, I feel like, the Reagan presidency. was actually the
Andrew
late
Cuneo,
90s.
the only person who has played a lot of cards in various decks between Doomsday and Mystic Remora.
That is probably true.
You
Yeah, exactly.
don't see very many people playing these cards, but
Hey,
Andrew.
that's who I learned Vintage from, basically. I mean, Lauer was always around the edges suggesting crazy things, but it's Cuneo and I that would go to the local tournaments in Pittsburgh. All right, well, Tom has managed to resolve an Ancestral Recall. That's got to be good for him.
That's a powerful card. I'm sure he's happy to have cast that.
Yeah, indeed.
Resolve. Yeah, the Dak Vane deck is interesting to me, that Goblin Welder, Mindslaver, all those type of things, because on so many levels it feels so underpowered to me compared to the other decks. And yet,
yeah, but honestly, I think it's the Dak Faden that has made this archetype come back. Like there you see the Goblin Welder, which Tom is going to fight over with a mental misstep. Goblin Welder is, people were Goblin Weldering to get back Mindslavers. That was kind of the tech, I don't know, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago. That was the Control Slaver list when it was sort of the last time that it peaked, which is about when I think it's probably the deck Rich was playing when he got second to Vintage Championships, honestly. And the deck has kind of as more powerful things have been printed, I think that it kind of faded away. But Dak Faden, in my mind, it's just perfect in this deck because sometimes your problem is getting artifacts in the graveyard so that your welders can start doing things. And sometimes you have a Notion Thief. Oh, wow, Rich going for an Ancestral Recall of his own, and here it's on top of the stack. So he basically baited the mental misstep with that Goblin Welder. Tom took the bait. I can't blame him. Welder's a plenty fine mental misstep target.
could have more
Now
mental
Rich
misstep.
says the coast is clear. I'm going to Ancestral, and maybe he'll also manage to defend his Welder out of this.
Yeah, these are incredible openings by both players.
Mindbreak Trap. The Mox Ruby is the betraying third spell, isn't it? That's Tom's Mindbreak Trap. Main deck, might as well. And it works. It stops the Ancestral. If it hadn't been for that Mox Ruby, there wouldn't have been 3 spells cast by Rich. But Mox Ruby, Goblin Welder, and Ancestral. The misstep counters.
If Rich happens to have a copy of Mental Misstep in his hand that could have countered the misstep, that now he gets Mindbreak Trap, so he just loses the Welder because it's on the stack as well.
Wow.
Really crazy.
Well, yeah.
I did not expect Mindbreak Trap to be a big player in this matchup. Can be pretty confident it's coming out. So
yeah, it doesn't seem particularly good in the matchup for sure. But I mean, Tom threw one.
Particularly bad in the matchup, but particularly great on this turn.
All true. Yeah, I can't tell how good I think Mindbreak Trap is. I keep fiddling with it. I've got a couple in my Merfolk sideboard. I've been playing it in Dredge a little bit too. I mean, because Dredge, you just have like a dozen cards where their only mission in life is to randomly hurt the opponent if they're the ones in your opening draw. It's like
Dredge deck is not fast enough to beat decks like the one that you usually pilot, right? But you need a card like Mindbreak Trap.
Yeah, but like you can play Force of Will in your Dredge deck. You can play.
That's not nearly as powerful. You can, but I mean, if you're worried about speed, Mindbreak Trap is right where you want to be because you don't need the other card. And
well, but the Mindbreak Trap doesn't get turned on against random opponents. Like Chalice is actually the thing I've been playing the most lately. If you go first and drop a turn 1 Chalice, it's really annoying to just about every deck in the format.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, yes, Mindbreak Trap does lots of interesting things. And meanwhile, Tom resolved his Ancestral first, so Rich did not get to resolve his. But now here you see the other signature card that Rich Shay is like the only man in the world piloting, Night's Whisper.
Yeah, this card is an interesting card, and I actually think it was the reason he beat you. Last week, he cast, I think, multiple Night's Whispers that it really looked like he was behind the 8 ball and just didn't have a lot of gas. He would cast like 2 Night's Whispers in a turn, and all of a sudden he's got a full hand and still didn't think he was going to win. But, he was able to find just those exact cards, those obviously lots of one-ofs, not too surprising in Vintage. But, he had to draw exactly Strip Mine, had to have exactly Mirror Battlesphere to be able to turn off Island Walk, have enough blockers.
You see what he did here to defend the Night's Whisper? He mental misstepped one of the copies of Flusterstorm that were on the stack and then paid for the other.
So that actually means exactly what I brought up last turn, where it would be real interesting if he had the misstep or the misstep and went for the Ancestral to try to blow him out with the other misstep. Probably exactly what happened and got Mindbreak Trapped.
Crazy. So the fact that Mindbreak Trap exiled everything on the stack was particularly powerful.
Right. He had the perfect cards to defend both his Welder and Recall.
Crazy.
And Tom had exactly the foil.
Which is like a one-up, right?
Really. I mean, he could Force of Will, but then one of the two is still resolving.
Right. I think that's a one-of in Tom's list, too.
Oh, I sure hope so. That is not a card you can just load up on.
No, two in the main. He talked to me. I played my Storm deck against him in this preseason scrimmage. He said he hated losing to Storm, so he had 2 in the main.
Tom played Chris last week, and I'm not sure he plays next week, but I guess he anticipated playing a Storm deck.
Does he get Raptor? That's the only Storm deck we have.
I don't know. I'm not sure what the matchups are next week. I haven't looked. I mean, I know mine, but
I can find it real quick.
I do not play against Raptor next week, as I played him last week.
Tom Martell versus Luis Scott Vargas.
Mindbreak Trap is interesting.
Yeah, it's better in that matchup, and they're gushing and fast binding. It will come up.
Maybe Mindbreak Trap is better than I originally gave it credit for. It actually has a decent number of applications in a lot of the matchups. It's not good against me, you, and Dave, though.
Definitely.
Not where you want to be.
Meanwhile, Tom's Black Lotus got Jace the Mind Sculptor into play. He's also managed to resolve a Time Walk. Rich Shay sitting on just 2 cards.
I think every turn I've seen from Tom has been the best turn I've ever seen that didn't involve someone dying. As far as this deck is concerned, without having Fastball just going off, his turn 1 was Ancestral Misstep Mindbreak Trap you. His second turn was drawing a bunch of cards, Lotus, Time Walk, Jace. I mean, what is happening?
It's pretty ridiculous.
Preordained Flusterstorm to set it up to next turn go Gush, Lotus, Jace, Time Walk, Brainstorm, take another turn, Brainstorm, 10 cards in hand right now before he puts any back. Like, just insane.
Pretty ridiculous.
No one has ever argued that Tom Martell is the luckiest person on the planet, but you are really seeing it firsthand. Really crazy.
Yeah, the blue decks in Vintage really feel like they're snowball decks, right? You get a little bit ahead, and you just keep pulling further and further ahead.
You get a little bit ahead with your Curse Catcher, and then slam that Lord of Atlantis, and you're a little bit further ahead. Oh, those blue decks.
The blue control decks. We're not playing blue decks. Come on. They just happen to have islands.
I had to. Come on. I've loved playing my deck. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, you're 2-0 with yours. I guess we're 3-3 between the 3 of us.
Yeah, 2-0.
Dave's 0-2, I'm 1-1.
Yeah. It's funny.
All right, well, there's Mystic Remora. This is definitely one of the cards that Tom is a big fan of, in particular, in a field where you think everybody's going to be playing blue decks. Again, another card that's terrible against the Merfolk deck. But other than that, you know what? Drawing a card off of non-creatures, most people stop casting stuff when you play Mystic Remora. And you upkeep it for 2-3 turns. You continue to do stuff with your other mana, activate your Jace, whatever. Wow, Rich Shay is like, I don't care. Draw a card. I'll use it. Draw another card for me to cast for you. Here's Mind Slaver.
Force of Will here, this game is over, right?
Say again?
If he has Force of Will here, this game is over, right? He's going to draw a card off from Mora, get to untap with Jace, Rich down to 1 card in hand.
Yeah, so, Mind Slaver feels like it's...
This is just Rich Shay saying, if this doesn't... I don't have any choice. I'm so far behind now that I have to let you draw a card instead of letting you see 4 more cards next turn, as he has a fetch land to shuffle off the Jace, Brainstorm, etc. So he just has to hope that now is the time.
Yeah, I agree. Rich has played this game well. He's just gotten kind of brutally...
His draw has been absurd. Just Tom's been as good as you can get, minus that. Like, that's going to be true in games where you've cast Black Lotus, Jace, Ancestral, and got a Mindbreak Trap that just blew someone out. Like, things are going well for you.
Oh, I like the line from chat. It says Desperation Slaver instead of Control Slaver.
Oh yeah, this definitely feels at least like I need this to resolve. If it doesn't, I understand I've lost. So let's see what happens. Which is exactly what I would do in that spot.
Mm-hmm.
Things are not getting any better when you pass the turn your opponent's Jace in play. I'll tell you that right now. Whatever format you're playing, be it old standard, old extended, current, modern doesn't, not legal, but yeah, legacy or vintage even. Jace is absurd.
So Tom's cracking a fetch land as a response to his Mystic Remora trigger. He did not want to draw. He could have drawn the card that he brainstormed onto the top with Jace. Doesn't want it. He'd rather reshuffle.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I guess he's thinking... It's taking him a little longer here than I would have expected. He's probably thinking about what to draw. Maybe he has a tutor. One play he did against me when we were testing this deck, well, I guess it was the preseason game, he actually mystical tutored as a response to the Mystic Remora trigger to put Force of Will on top of his library.
Oh yeah, sweet play.
Yeah, it was pretty cute.
I assume if he has that option and doesn't have Force of Will, that he wouldn't really have to think about it. So I assume that he got a phone call or something happened. This is probably a pretty easy play. Be it Mystical Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, whatever, same thing. But yeah, you don't want to let this Mind Slaver resolve if you can help it.
He's just going to draw a card off a newly shuffled library.
I mean, he could already have a hand full of Force of Wills too.
Right.
You know.
Does have 7
cards. Could resolve. I mean.
Yeah, there's the Force of Will.
Mental Misstep exiled. Not as exciting on this board. Ancestral already gone. Not a lot to misstep anyway. So already Mystic Remora paying off.
Yep. I assume he'll pay upkeep. Oh, okay, Vampiric.
So that means that if, well, I guess there is no counter that Rich is going to really be able to cast for the mana he had available, but let's say even he had something like Flusterstorm, which I haven't looked at the list to see if Rich is playing that. Tom could have responded with the Remora trigger on the stack again by Vampiric Tutoring and actually getting that Mind Break trap to actually get
You're right.
Which would
you're right.
Completely sick. Of course, that didn't happen as Tom is really far ahead and getting further and further every turn, I assume. But, you know, that would have been cool.
Now he just lets the Remora go. Wants to use his mana, and he sees that Rich only has 1 card left in hand, so he's not interested in paying the cumulative upkeep.
Well, that probably means Tom's going to have a pretty big turn.
I would
More
think so. He also Vampiric Tutored for whatever he's planning to do here.
Yeah, likely a Fast Fund or a Gush type card. Or, I guess, Yawgmoth's Will. I assume he's playing Yawgmoth's Will is probably game over, right?
That sounds right. Does he have Vault Key in his list?
Well, his graveyard has Lotus, Ancestral, Giant Walk, Preordained, Gush. So, pretty hard to cast those cards again and lose whatever he's got.
Yeah, I would assume that he went for Yawgmoth's Will there. I assume he's got some land in his hand.
Deckless.
Or Mox. Yeah, he doesn't play Vault Key. His deck basically wins with Tendrils. Okay, there's the Fast Bond. Might have been that he was Vampiricing for Fast Bond here. I mean, Fast Bond is what lets this deck, quote-unquote, go off. Now suddenly he can start gushing. Gush adds 2 mana to his mana pool and draws 2 cards, so it's pretty ridiculous.
Right. I figured he was probably tutoring for either Fast Bond or Yawgmoth's Will, whichever one he doesn't have. He might have already had Fast Bond. Yeah, he probably already had Demonic Tutor, so you know that can just allow him to go get Gush. Yawgmoth's Will is extremely game over at this point, right? Tutor in the graveyard 2 now, has more lands, has multiple Gushes, so Tom going to go off and win this game pretty easily.
Sure looks like it. I mean, technically he's 1 mana short of Yawgmoth's Will right here, but second Gush would get that done. Was that Regrowth? What was that? It was. He plays Regrowth in his deck. Regrow the Gush. That's essentially free. Yeah, you can tell how fast the responses are coming through, too. It seems like Rich is just F6'd out of this. No longer even bluffing. He's like, all right, go through the motions and kill me.
I mean, he didn't fight over Mind Slaver, and he has 1 card in hand, so
exactly.
So.
He knows that Tom already knows he's out.
Yep. And honestly, even if he countered any spell that he wanted to, Tom still wins this game.
Yes.
Just give him a free card that's just a free counter spell. Tom wins.
Thoughtseize. Is Rich going to show him a card?
Another Night Twister. That's interesting.
Wow. He said go? Surprising.
Yeah. I guess he did get the Fast Bond, didn't have Yawgmoth's Will, so. Which means Demonic Tutoring for Gush, I assume.
Probably. Yeah, he probably DT'd for Gush and then didn't hit particularly well. But whatever. Handful of 6 cards, active Jace. Thoughtseize is the last card out of Rich's hand, and now he gets an untap phase.
Well, I have 1 card in hand again, so Rich is right back in this. Drew Force of Will, can hard cast it. That might do it. So, Jace, leave it unchecked for 4 or 5 turns. Pretty good, I guess. Learn
All of
something
the
every
things
day.
Tom has done are pretty good.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Maybe I'll get a happier commentary partner this time around. Last week he was a little salty when we got him in the booth, having lost to Chris.
Oh yeah, that I got to cast with Tom, and he did not look like he wanted to watch the match. Of course, we still have up to 2 more games.
True.
And I've been reading on a lot of posts that Rich Shay is the vintage professional and Tom knows nothing, so still might be a favorite. You don't know.
We'll see.
What's your take on I don't know a good way to describe it, like great players who don't play as much vintage versus people who play a lot of vintage but aren't necessarily the best players? You think there's a huge edge one way or the other?
I definitely think this is a format that rewards you for knowing the format inside and out, right? It reminds me of Modern circa Pro Tour Valencia, right? We saw a top 8 there where it was basically a bunch of moto grinders who played a ton of Modern. And that they did better than, the super teams, which were made up of players that I think are largely better players in a vacuum. But Modern was a format that really rewarded knowing the insides and outs of all the matchups. So, yeah, I mean, I do think
That's a
that...
small sample size. You have to talk to me again after Pro Tour DC this year.
No, fair enough. I do think that, the fresher the format is, the more sort of raw play skill and sort of the intuition that you build up over years of being sort of a Hall of Fame caliber Magic player really pays off. I mean,
No
I think
that's for sure.
Sorry?
I said no argument with that. That's for sure. The fresher formats where everyone's on the same playing field, of course, the best players are going to have that advantage by being the best.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Rich and Steve Menendy, and obviously those guys have played more vintage than any of the other 8 of us. I think that helps. I think that definitely, I don't know, levels the playing field.
Right.
I mean,
it's certainly going to bridge the gap between, like, if you think that Luis Scott Vargas and Tom Martell and Joshua Layton are better players, certainly having played more vintage is going to bridge the gap. But is it going to, in your opinion, leapfrog? And is it going to be a big difference one way or the other? Like, are they going to be highly advantaged, small advantage, or small dogs in your mind? I think it's actually a really interesting debate that people have been having. I think that a lot of people have been, I think originally it became a little childish, but I think that the debate has matured a lot and people actually have some very good opinions and some good thoughts about both the players and the format, and it's become actually something pretty interesting. So I'm definitely curious for your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, look, my pick to win it was LSV because I think he's got both. I think LSV, while he hasn't played as much vintage as, Rich or Steve, I think he's played a lot of vintage over the years, and like none of the interactions are surprising to him when they come up. Plus, combine that with a Hall of Fame quality, playing ability. Just he's played more Magic than pretty much any of us. So I don't know. I mean, I looked. Rich and Steve both won the first round, and I thought that they both won fairly convincingly. Okay, here Tom's finally got the tendrils to finish Rich off, and
I thought both of their matches were extremely close.
I mean, I guess the game 1 against me, Rich had to draw his 1-of Strip Mine to stay in it. He did draw quite well, but game 2, I don't know. He made a lot of really smart decisions and managed to win a game that most people thought was lost.
Yeah,
and
he definitely played.
And Menendian managed to charge through 2 teeny tiny windows that Dave gave him in that matchup. I don't know. I think those guys. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out over the course of the season. I mean, for me, it's one of the interesting storylines. I could easily see Rich Shay or Steve Menendian certainly in the playoffs, and now we're just playing to see what happens there.
Oh yeah, no question. I think that this is as even a 10-person format as you're going to get for something like this, just because of how hard that is to actually accomplish. I meant more in general, like other vintage stars that maybe no one's name you have heard of if you're not part of the vintage community, who have played a lot of vintage, who are maybe behind a lot of the decks that get built in vintage that people then work off of, who even admittedly are not the best pilots, but understand the format a lot better. I think it's interesting.
I agree. Like I said, I think that it does remind me of Modern in that sense. I think that the more somebody like an LSV plays this format, or if Martell gets hooked in, if Josh gets hooked in and starts playing it a ton, then then they can sort of overcome that gap eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely had a lot of fun just these past few weeks really thinking about Vintage and trying to learn more about the format because I am pretty confident in my play abilities, and I have played a fair amount of Vintage, although not as much in the past calendar year. So, yeah, it's definitely something I've been enjoying and plan on playing more of, and really, yeah, I just enjoy opportunities like this. And like I said, just play testing matchups with Dave this week. He's like at a poker tournament. We're on this flight back from Miami playing poker tournament. He's like, yeah, let's fire up some Vintage, play test our matchups. Just a lot of fun.
And meanwhile, somebody like Chris Pakula is also, I think, drawing very live. When Chris is here sitting 2-0, he's not too proud to show up with the workshop deck and just crush people because it's the best deck.
What do you think of that version of the workshop deck? Have you gotten to play with it much yet?
Not specifically. I mean, I'm sure that it's competitive. I don't know if it's better or worse than, the Smokestack version or the Forge Master version. I tend to get drawn toward the raw power of what the Forge Master version of the Shops list can do. But I don't know which one is the best. I mean, I do think that workshop decks are doing extremely well online right now. I mean, the championships over the weekend was Shops versus Shops in the final. And now Chris is the only guy smart enough to show up with a workshop deck. So
yeah, I think Shops is really powerful. I definitely think Shops is really powerful. Playing that matchup quite a bit, the Terra Nova deck against the Merfolk deck, it felt real rough for the Terra Nova deck. You have so many, like, Thorn of Amethyst does absolutely nothing. No Rod is complete blank. Chalice is pretty bad. Then,
it's okay if you can Wasteland the Caverns, but you have to Wasteland Cavern of Souls.
Right, but their Wastelands are also good against you.
Yeah.
And, especially like Dave's sideboard, being able to play 4 Dismember, 4 Steel Sabotage, Hercule's Recall, 4 Force of Will. It's just like, I just don't have any threats. And my Dismembers are costing me 4 life, and Ancient Tombs are costing me 2, and they're wastelanding all my workshops. I'm like, I just can't do anything.
All right, well, Rich led with a Spell Bomb and a misstep for Tom's Preordain in this game. Spell Bomb's interesting. I mean, Rich obviously values the ability to blow up Tom's graveyard. I think he oh, no. He's just like, second Spell Bomb. I thought he was activating the first one when I saw the triggers on the stack. But no, he is all in on blowing up Tom's graveyard. I don't think he expects Tom to be able to win without recursing sort of Yawgmoth's Will to recurse the Gushes to get the storm count high enough for the Tendrils kill.
Well, he can certainly win. It just definitely makes it.
It's a lot harder. Especially if Tom's... How many regrowths does Tom play?
Does he have multiple regrowths? I mean, he certainly has Yawgmoth's Will.
He has 3.
Oh, wow.
He has 3 copies of regrowth in his
All
main.
right. Well, I did not see that. Yeah, that's a lot of regrowths.
Mm-hmm.
Rich not having a second land or a Mox or Mana Source is not where he wants to be.
Yeah, that part's not good for sure. Yeah, he seemed like he was more interested in resolving a second Spell Bomb than cycling the first one, which probably makes sense. Although I'm sure next turn he'll cycle one if he still doesn't have a land drop. I would think.
Yeah. It's an interesting spot. I mean, of course it depends on his hand. If he's got a card like Night's Whisper where he really needs to have a land, it's tough to not cycle, but yeah, getting a second Spellbomb online definitely makes it harder for Tom to go off and really keeps him, safer for a while, at the very least.
All right, well. Thought we might get a look at Rich's hand, but that Thoughtseize also. All right, Rich has drawn a card. It's a Strip Mine.
All right.
Wow. Whack your Underground? Just get that out of here.
Interesting. Yeah, we didn't get to see his hand. He missteps the Thoughtseize.
He must not have Night's Whisper. I mean, surely you tap that for mana to cast Night's Whisper there. Oh, wow. Is he going to run into a Gush? Yeah, no? He's not going to run into a Gush. Wow. Yeah, it's super risky to Strip Mine there, too, against a Gush deck. I mean, I guess with no Fast Bond, it's not the end of the world, but still surprising. All right, Tom Mysticals for Ancestral. Puts Ancestral Recall on top of his library.
A good target, not too surprising. Rich has already used 2 missteps.
I know. Yeah, exactly. Now here's Basic Island.
Not fully basic.
Misstep number 3.
3. Wow. Misstep flooded.
Who needs lands when you can just cast free counters all day?
That is true. Mental Misstep is great against Tom's deck.
Yeah.
Absolutely great.
Black mana? Is he gushing as a response?
Would he tap black to gush in response, or is he going to vamp tutor and then gush?
Well, he has gushed. It's on the stack. Yeah, he just gushes with a black floating.
Yeah, that's fair.
Did not end. Okay, here's Force of Will pitching Time Walk. Wow.
Well, this is a good turn. Mental Misstep number 4?
Rich down to 2 cards. He's going to whack the graveyard to draw a 3rd card. Yes, pay for that ability, of course.
Time that he has to do that before Ancestral hits the graveyard. But, of course, he has another Spellbomb in play.
Yeah. Now what? You up to a Force and a blue card yet, Rich? How about misstep number 4?
That would be sweet. Wow.
Whoa, it is misstep number 4.
How much is he playing? Are we playing Vintage or Freeform here? He might just be
Savage.
That's great. Man, this format's great.
Still only got 1 land, but Tom Martell has no permanents. He's got literal nothing in play.
So a little bit from last game where Tom had out Jace and a million other things. This time, no permanents for you.
No, came up with a Sapphire. We know he's got one snow-covered island in his deck. Oh, actually, we know he has an underground.
Yeah, he played a land that we hadn't seen yet, playing the tropical snow-covered island and underground in hand.
Yeah,
so we know 2 of his 3 cards.
Yeah. Rich finally comes up with a 2nd land, Misty Rainforest.
That's interesting. I wonder why he chose to play tropical.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a little odd.
This could be something. anytime you play Black Lotus, yeah. The possibilities are nice.
Yeah.
So Tom with Snow-Covered Island, 2 mystery cards now, so actually may have some options.
You don't fight the Lotus, though.
Yeah.
I don't think.
It's not often that you do.
Yeah, Tom thinking about it, though.
Tom known for how fast he plays. Although with Magic Online, you can't ever tell when someone's thinking or whether they just had an itch.
Right.
You can't click right now.
There's the snow-covered island. We no longer know anything about Tom's hand. Black Lotus didn't do anything special right away.
Yeah.
Now kind of a stalemated game at this point, right? 4 cards apiece. Giant flurries of activity where Rich basically defended himself with all 4 copies of Mental Misstep. Wow, regrowth targeting Ancestral. Rich has to blow a spell bomb here, right?
Or counter, but yeah, it's not something you want to have happen. There's almost no chance he has a Mental Misstep in hand, so you can't really just allow that Ancestral.
Almost no chance?
It's very low.
The chance requires him to both be cheating and have snuck into a freeform game.
Could have started a freeform game, as it doesn't change much, and it would probably be a mental misclick instead of Mental Misstep.
Okay, well, fair enough.
Yeah, so Spellbombs have been pretty solid.
Yeah, definitely.
Pretty sweet inclusion by Rich Shay. See what Tom can do now with Graveyard Impunity.
It was actually one of the reasons I didn't play the dredge list I've been fiddling around with in the Super League here, because I had played against Rich. I knew he main deck Spellbomb. I knew he put a lot of value in Spellbomb and knew the matchup inside and out. So Abrupt Decay takes down Black Lotus.
Yeah, that is the risk of exposing it.
Knight's Whisper for Rich. Now suddenly he's up to 7 cards.
Yeah, I'm looking at Rich's deck list, and the Nihil Spellbombs are both sideboarded. And then no main deck.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Unless I'm missing. No, it looks like they're not in here.
Yeah, he smacked me around in a queue. I mean, he changes the deck list a couple of cards kind of every time he plays it to try
Yeah. That is true. I've seen a lot of different lists, and you see him in the daily events all the time because he's got 3-1 consistently. A lot of 3-1s, a couple of 4-0s. Does he actually think that this is the most powerful deck in Vintage? It feels like every time he talks about it, he calls it his pet deck. But it doesn't seem like he's that high on... I mean, of course he thinks it's strong. I'm not saying he doesn't think the deck's great, but I feel like he does not think it's one of the best decks, or certainly not the best deck.
I don't know. It's probably his most effective weapon of choice.
Yeah.
I find the Gush...
Sorry, go ahead.
I find the Gush Knight's Whisper synergy here kind of interesting. Like both decks have these draw 2s just kind of shrinking their effective deck size.
Yeah, the Knight's Whisper, when you don't have any way to actually play out the lands with a fast spawn, extremely powerful, and more powerful than Gush, but of course Gush is just so broken. But yeah, saying that, I really found it interesting hearing Steve Menendian talk about how, because he's just been playing so much Delver, Pyromancer type decks, so deck he plays all the time, thought there was a reasonable chance that he'd be playing it. And then he said that he actually loves to play Doomsday. He thinks it's the best deck. He just can't play it live because he's not fast enough, which I thought was incredibly interesting. He's like, if I play it on Magic Online, I can just sit there and stop and think for 6 minutes, make sure I have the right pile. I can't do that in real life. So I really like playing it on Magic Online. They think it's the best deck on Moto, and it's the best deck in the format. I just don't think it can be piloted in real life, which I thought was incredibly interesting.
That almost had the greatest thief in the multiverse out, by the way, but Tom used Force of Will, pitching, I believe, a misstep to stop Dak from coming into play.
I'm curious what Luis Scott Vargas thinks about Dak Faden. He's been vocal about that card a little bit here and there.
Yeah, I think I'm confident that it's good in Rich's deck.
Yeah,
like when you have Goblin Welders and you have Notion Thieves.
Oh, it certainly combos quite well with a lot of cards in the deck. No arguing that, and it's very strong against stacks. Clearly.
Yeah. Even stealing.
The question is whether it's vintage playable.
All right, Atog Thief revealed a hand which contains Force of Will, Goblin Welder, Mirror Battlesphere, Force of Will, Force of Will.
All right. That's a
Atog Thief discarded Notion Thief. So Tom took away the Notion Thief, left him with 3 Forces, a Battlesphere, and a Welder.
And that's probably the exact card he wants to draw, Knight's Whisper.
Yeah.
Because that hand is not hot.
Yeah, I mean, the Welder could be good, but he needs an artifact to stick and play.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess there's not that much in his yard, right? 2 Spellbombs and a Lotus is all he's got right now?
No, of course with that Dak Faden resolve, he just gets to go Welder and then discard the Battlesphere. Fully go off. With like 3 Force of Wills and whatever he draws off Dak Faden to go with it. Things would be looking real good if that Dak Faden resolved. They still look fine. This is an interesting game. Of course, we have no idea Tom has.
Rich must have had at least 2 of those Force of Wills at that point. He chose not to fight.
Right, he had all 3. Yeah, I'm sorry. He had to have
he had at least 2. I'm not sure if there was a draw phase in between, but he clearly chose not to fight over Dak Faden there.
Yeah, interesting decision.
Wow, but he's got 6 cards in his hand in a library all of a sudden.
Yeah, I actually think that if he had another blue card, he would have fought over the Dak Faden. But if he forced pitching Force, it would have left him with a Force and no other. I guess he had Notion.
He had Notion Thief at the time. When we saw the hand, it had
he might have drawn a blue card, or he might have drawn Notion Thief, whatever the case may have been. Because I have a feeling that he would have fought over it if he had double Force and didn't because he didn't have another blue card. I could just be completely wrong and be misreading game and how he thought it was going to play out, but that is what I would have thought.
The other thing Rich has to be a little bit worried about, he's down to 6 life.
Yeah.
And it's not like he's going to get attacked with creatures, but it means that like a baby tendrils can just kill him. If Tom just accumulates a hand of like two Moxes and a Tendrils of Agony, all of a sudden, you know, all those Storm copies go on the stack, and he has to start fighting individual copies of Tendrils.
Yeah, that's a weird spot to be in, especially when you have to pay 1 life to do it.
Yeah.
You have to pay 1 life to force a wall to save a life from the Tendrils. So yeah.
It becomes relevant once you get down
skill.
into single digits.
Absolutely true.
Now, I mean, I don't know that Tom can access his Tendrils, but he could randomly draw it. He could randomly tutor for it. And oh, by the way, that Gush means Tom's library is now active.
Both Gush library is just so good.
Both players sitting on active libraries now.
The library is extremely tough for the Rich Shay deck to deal with. I mean, it is the number one reason, by leaps and bounds, I think, of why he plays a main deck Strip Mine, which is not a great card in the control decks very often, but he has enough tutor effects that in library is so good against him that
I actually think Strip Mine is underrated. Like, I think Rich is right to play it. I often throw one in my control decks, at least in the sideboard and often in the main. Like, it does random things. Sometimes you get to, they're obviously mana tight and you can screw them. Sometimes it gets a library.
Oh, it's great against library, cavern, and bazaar, and workshop, no question. But it's still not a card you see very often. And
no, it's certainly true that he's one of the
tutor effects just make it that much better. The fact that he has access to it when he needs it against those really good lands, yeah, it's just really powerful. Of course, Strip Mine is a great card, no question about that.
Wow. All right. Rich has his Ancestral. He says, I'm going to kickstart the library this way. But yeah, he makes himself vulnerable. If Tom fights over it, suddenly, if that Ancestral doesn't resolve, then Rich is off the library. Can he afford to force? He goes down to 3 cards. Ancestral would take him to 6. So he's still got active library if this Force of Will successfully defends the Ancestral. Tom, you got anything else? Tom should totally fight this if he can. I would absolutely use my last Force of Will, my last blue card here. Given that you're playing Draw-Go and given that it turns off library if you counter the Ancestral.
Yeah. And we know 2 of his 3 cards, right? Battlesphere and another Force.
Yes.
Not much to work with.
Yeah, I know this would be...
Oh,
wow. Seems only fair after Rich drew all 4 of his, right? Kind of a beating, though.
Yeah, I guess it's fair then.
I mean, we know Rich has a Force of Will. The fact that he's still thinking makes me think he's probably drawn a blue card. This will be a lot easier once we get hand cams. I know we were hoping to have them up this week, but we definitely plan to have hand cams next week. It's a little tricky to set the tech up. We basically have to screen share with all 10 of the competitors and then add that into the stream. But I think it's totally worth it. So that is the plan. Hopefully we'll be able to implement later this week with you guys and get them on the stream for next week. Yep, Ancestral countered. Now Rich is in a lot of trouble. He did get Tom off the library, I guess. Tom's down to 5 cards in hand. Oh, Vampiric. What does that do? Excuse me.
Yawgmoth's is sweet.
Wow. So he picked a fight over Ancestral. This is good old-fashioned draw-go is what we got here. Pick a fight on your opponent's end step, get him tapped out, run him out of counters, untap, and then just drop the hammer.
Of course, Rich Shay down to 3 life.
Jeez. Yeah, those Knights Whispers probably look attractive, and they just aren't. So what else is he? He gets blue for the Ancestral, I assume. He can Time Walk off of this. He can play a land off of this. I don't know how much more he can.
Much more mana. Well, Mox is huge for sure. He really wants to be able to play land, Dak Faden, or something along those lines, get Battlesphere in the graveyard, and Time Walk, but he needs another mana source to be able to do all of that.
I don't think he's played a land this turn. I mean, I think
right. He still needs one more mana source.
He has a Strip Mine and a Scalding Tarn to choose from.
Yeah. He has 2 mana from the Lotus, and 1 from a Mox and 1 from a land, so he wants to play Dak Faden. Although...
Well, he decided to go for Time Walk.
Never mind, that doesn't work anyway, because Yawgmoth Scroll is going to cause the creature to be exiled.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah,
so.
he can't discard anything this turn.
But he can play out some artifacts to be able to make Welder somewhat of a thing again. He can strip the library, which is interesting. Not really too much he can do. Of course, Ancestral Time Walk is already a pretty great turn.
It's not nothing. Strip Mine's got to be tempting here. I mean, you can just strip the library against. I'm pretty sure he hasn't played a land.
Right. It really depends on how big his next turn is going to be and whether he needs the mana himself, I assume.
Fair. I mean, unless his hand is doing something we're not thinking of, I don't see a way for him to cast any of the spells that are in there. Right? I mean, he could, he can't crack Scalding Tarn for mana and then cast Night's Whisper. That kills him.
Yeah, that is probably not the best line.
I think he can play a spell bomb and he can strip the library is what I see from looking at Justice Graveyard.
I think, well, if that's the play, the better play is to play Strip Mine, play both spell bombs, and untap with your Time Walk, and you Strip Mine anyway.
Yeah, good call. You can Strip Mine next turn, on the Time Walk turn.
Yeah, so there's no reason to Strip now. So if he's going to play Strip Mine, it's definitely better to play both spell bombs, and then he can untap if he needs the mana, he has it. He'll have Strip Mine available to him, so yeah, it's definitely a good turn. Definitely exactly what he needed to be doing.
Yeah, and those spell bombs can be cashed in for cards. So.
Yeah, which is great. And he has Welder, which...
Right, he can get them back in the graveyard next turn so that Welder can do things.
Well, you can just cycle. Like, you can use the spell bomb, sack it, draw a card, and then sack the other spell bomb to Welder to get spell bomb back and draw a card off that as well. Like, you don't have to use the spell bomb to draw a card. It's just when it dies.
Oh my god, I didn't even notice that. A Welder
combo. Actually, a full combo with the Welder to be able to draw cards.
That's spectacular. How about Demonic Tutor? That's got to do something good.
Yeah, it's a good card. That is a good card.
It's funny. The spell bombs getting rid of Tom's Graveyard not nearly as relevant now that any Tendrils is basically lethal. All right, I think he DT'd to Dak. So
that would make a lot of sense.
Now it is Mere Battlesphere time.
So the question is, can he survive a turn?
Right.
Tom does not need much to go with the Tendrils to be able to win.
Right.
But he also doesn't have... Actually, he doesn't have double black now. He's usually
he just stripped Underground Sea instead of Library.
Makes a lot of sense. Of course, it really just depended on what he was going to be doing, like how explosive his turn was going to be. And of course, if your turn is going to be get Mere Battlesphere out, get a Planeswalker out, just fully go off, cutting off mana sources where he needs to draw cards anyway. He can't gush without Underground. And so Rich
Shay, ladies and gentlemen.
Lethal damage, Mere Battlesphere, of course. Deals 4, it's an 8/7, and protects with the Welder for the last point. That
Crazy.
was awesome. That was actually awesome.
And now we're on to game 3.
Stuck on one land for several turns and just use the spell bombs.
Jeez.
Actually, seeing how good Spellbomb was in that game makes me more surprised that he does not play the main after you said that he used to play the main.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he main decked it against me.
I think I've seen him in the main deck, and they've definitely been in the main deck of a lot of lists. Of course, a lot of lists get to play cards like Trinket Mage, where, it's a pretty sweet target.
Yeah, he could easily have also said, there won't be Dredge in this field.
Right, but, I mean, he's boarding them in this matchup. It's certainly not Dredge, so has more application. And of course, definitely going to be a lot of Yawgmoth Spells deck in this field, though.
Yeah, fair. Wow, that was awesome. Rich putting on a clinic. And then we get Menendian in the next match. The Vintage Experts.
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't see the hands, but I have a feeling Rick Shay played that game great.
We certainly saw enough.
Oh, yeah, every play seemed like he knew exactly where he wanted to be, exactly how the game needed to play out for him to win. And he had to get a little lucky, like he had to draw the tutors, which he's playing tutors, it's vintage. You draw them a fair number of the time. And so, yeah, just set it up perfectly. I think the Yawgmoth's Will is exactly what he needed, of course, off the Vamp, and I think he did exactly what you need to do, Lotus into Ancestral, into Time Walk, get that Strip Mine out, get the Spell Bombs out, just played extremely tight. Won a game that he was not looking great in.
Do you think there's anything Tom should mix up now that he's seen the Spell Bomb, Attack the Graveyard aspect of Rich's deck?
That's a great question. I don't know all of the options that Tom has available. Let's see. Yeah, it certainly makes your regrowth less exciting. I wonder if there's some chance that Tom decides to go. He has the Oath of Druid sideboard plan. I don't think that. Yeah, does he have any way to? He's not actually playing Forbidden Orchard, though, right? He only has that for creature matchups. Is that right or no? Yeah, I actually don't think he has Forbidden Orchard, so he can't go to that plan. That would be cool, though, if that was an option to hope to get lucky that way.
Tom is leading with a turn 1 Thoughtseize.
I should probably open this one. All right, so I assume Rich Shay is going to use one of his 4 missteps on this.
Nope, it's resolving.
He had too many missteps, it wasn't worth
it. Don't bother. Still had all these missteps. Yeah, Tom's still thinking. I'll certainly read out Rich's hands once we see it. So standings right now, we've got what? You're 2-0.
I like that.
Chris is 2-0.
Lucky.
Rich can get to 2-0, and Steve can get to 2-0.
Yeah, definitely interesting that we have the 5-1-0s against the 5-0-1s. Definitely, make some crazy standings that you wouldn't have expected. But, the more likely result is that you're going to still have the bell curve at the end of it with, 2 to 3 2-0s, 2 to 3 0-2s, and the rest one.
Well, I broke serve.
You did. You got lucky.
Probably.
Luis's draw is not so hot. That match was
definitely.
That was rough. You had one turn where you got to do something, and it really wasn't an exciting thing. It was repeal Mock Sapphire in the end.
and he repealed a Lord.
Yeah, that you got to recast immediately and kill him next turn.
Well, I liked that part. Yeah. All right, Atog the Lord discards Notion Thief, so once again, Tom has deprived him of Notion Thief. The rest of his hand is Mana Crypt, Volcanic Island, Ancestral Recall, Time Walk, Scalding Tarn, Goblin Welder. He took Notion Thief. He must have Mental Misstep for the Ancestral.
I would certainly think that's likely. Otherwise, he's probably going to lose.
Right. You can't just let him keep the Ancestral. But now, what do you do if you're rich? Like, lead with the Welder, try to bait the misstep?
And I mean, there's almost no reason not to, right? Like, casting Ancestral this turn is not critical. He's not missing land drops or anything. It would be interesting, I guess, if Tom didn't have the misstep and he's trying
just
to
next level him.
Because he didn't think he could beat the Notion Thief either. That'd definitely be interesting. Maybe you just...
That was a turn 2 Notion Thief draw, too.
Oh, yeah.
Could have been Mana Crypt Notion Thief on turn 2.
Well, he's playing the Mana Crypt, which means something's happening.
Wow, he just wants to time walk. Wants to get down another land. Right, which means it was really a turn 1 Notion Thief hand, if you think about it.
Yeah. Of course, Rich ending the last game despite taking no creature damage at 3. So turn 1 Mana Crypt into Time Walk is definitely interesting.
Life total's a resource, right?
Yeah. And some of my practice games against Dave, where he was playing the TGO Oath deck, He would have Mana Crypt out against some of my Merfolk, where I just have like, a 2/2 out, and he'd cast Time Walk. I'm like, sweet. Flip that coin.
1.5.
More damage than I can do. Just let it resolve.
Wow. I'll just draw another one. Apparently you don't like me to have this card.
All right. Well, making sense why you went with that line, huh?
Crazy.
It's interesting that he just chose to run it out there, though. Not a play you see very often.
Well, I mean, Tom... Makes sense. Oh, wow. Tom regrows Thoughtseize. So the regrowths are still in the deck. Here comes Thoughtseize again.
Yeah, I think Rich choosing to just play the main phase Notion Thief, assuming that Tom's not just going to cast Gush or Ancestral or anything on his turn. So if then Rich decides to play Notion Thief during his end step, it allows Tom to respond by casting something like Ancestral. So
Right. All right. This time Tom did take the Ancestral. Rest of the hand is Vampiric Tutor, Goblin Welder. Man, Vampiric for Dak? He doesn't have the mana to cast it, does he? He is upkeep Vampiric Tutoring. What's he going to get, though? I mean, the Dak Notion Thief combo is ridiculous. Oh, how about Tinker? Good old-fashioned Tinker away my Mana Crypt for giant artifact creature. Here's Mirror Battlesphere. Remember him from last game? Now Martell basically has...
It's really unlikely that Tom actually had the Mental Misstep. He would have countered the Vampiric Tutor.
Wow, so he bluffed the first time?
Well, no, I think that he couldn't beat the Notion Thief, or didn't think that he really probably doesn't have a way to kill Notion Thief, which means he can't gush and can't really do anything, can't go off. Notion Thief is so good against him. And also it kind of represents the fact that there's a reasonable chance he has a misstep, might hold off for a turn on that Ancestral lead with the Welder, try to bait it out, and, Tom will have a chance to then draw the Mental Misstep.
That was crazy.
Yeah, Shay's draw was so good. His opening hand was so good, and all of his draw steps were also so good. And
against an opponent with no Force of Will. Like if Tom has a Force of Will for that Tinker, it would have just been a blowout.
Well, can Tom win through Notion Thief?
Well, you make a good point. It's just the second Notion Thief all by itself is...
He may have just been dead to Notion Thief. They're reasonable. There's not a lot of cards that even deal with that. I mean, a lot of the removal in this format is things like Abrupt Decays. He's certainly not playing anything like Lightning Bolt, so he might have just been dead to it. I'm trying to look at his deck.
Crazy. Well, he definitely died to it. Or I guess technically he died to the Battlesphere. Battlesphere is just a glory hand, right? Notion Thief did all the work. Battlesphere shows up to say, it was all me, it was all me.
Yeah, he actually has... Well, he could have boarded in Toxic Deluge, a one of.
Maybe.
I mean, there's some chance. It's decent against Battlesphere, and it will kill the Welder, so it can't just keep coming back. So that wouldn't surprise me, although I don't have any idea. And then his only other option, I think, is playing Jace and minusing it, and then hoping that he doesn't have the land to replay it, or that he can counter it on the way back down.
Wow.
So, of course, Notion Thief, absurd against Jace in so many different ways. And, yeah, I think Jace was actually his only way to beat the card. His whole deck relies on... I mean, he's not going to be able to go off with... I mean, I guess he could win without the Tinker on the Mana Crypt to be able to cast a Tendrils for, let's say, 10 damage. That is completely reasonable, which is why you can certainly play it out pretty easily against the Notion Thief.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, even if he countered the Tinker, he was in real bad shape with that Mana Crypt just being dead. Mana Crypt was his best out, I think.
All true. All right, so... We're going to take a break. We are going to get ready for... We have one more match left. Appreciated you joining us, Eric. We're going to bring in Tom, actually, for the last match. And we'll be right back after this.
Someone will commentate.